Verses 40 through 45, the time of the end. And we know the time of the end started in 1798. And before reading these verses of Daniel 11, verses 40 to 45, I want us to review a little bit what we've done in terms of principles of interpretation. The first point is regarding the battles. Every battle we looked at was a literal battle. There were really wars between the North and the South. Number two, the king of the North was a political power that was always intervening in Palestine. That's a second. So this king of the North was always Syria, or the country who took Syria and invaded Palestine. Number three, these are general principles. With the Roman Empire, you find now an external power that dominates both the North and the South. Rome took over the kingdom of Ptolemy, and it took over the kingdom of Antiochus, or Seleucus. So here we have Rome takes both North and South. So you have sometimes an external power that enters the picture. You find that with Rome. And you find it later with papal Rome, when through the Crusades they did take on Palestine. One of the Crusades established a Christian kingdom in Jerusalem for over 100 years in the Middle Ages. Number four. These governments were moved by greed, by political expansion, by revenge, but were also motivated for religious purposes. I think about Justinian, who sent Belisarius, and he went about to defeat the Arians. So their motivation was political and religious. Religious for war. We find, for example, with the French Revolution that it was political and it was also religious. You also find the factor of revenge, especially at the beginnings between the Ptolemies and the Seleucus. They were just seeking revenge, the children, on behalf of their parents. Number five, whoever takes Syria is the king of the North. And we see Rome coming in. They take the North and the South. But the king of the North is the key picture throughout Daniel 11, especially at the end. It's the king of the North. Read with me in Jeremiah. Jeremiah chapter 1, where it says, from the north the problems will come. Israel was always invaded by the north. It was their weakest point. Verse 14, Jeremiah 1:14. Nydia, what does it say? Then the Lord said unto me.
Then the Lord said unto me, out of the north an evil shall break forth upon all the inhabitants of the land.
So out of the north everything shall come. Verse 15, For lo,
I will call all the families of the kingdom of the north, saith the Lord, and they shall come, and they shall set every one his throne at the entering of the gates of Jerusalem, and against all the walls thereof round about, and against all the cities of Judah.
All right, we find that to have happened, that whoever takes Syria becomes the king of the north, and they attack, what we said here in number 2, Palestine and Jerusalem. We saw that with Rome in its pagan phase with Pompey. We saw it in Rome papal with the Crusades, how they took that area, and we are yet to see it in its third phase. Now, there is another power in here, whoever takes Syria, which we're going to see, is the Ottoman Empire. And there must be some reference to the Ottoman Empire here, because they appear in the book of Revelation in chapter 9, Islam. And keep in mind that sometimes it's the same religion in the north as in the south. Let's go to a sixth principle as I thought about this. That sometimes centuries are skipped between verses. Centuries skipped between verses. It is chronological, but there are gaps in the story of Daniel chapter 11 where Gabriel just jumps a few centuries. I mean, they're just a few days. And we find the seventh and last idea that I want to share is that, well, I already mentioned that really in 7. You have external powers intervening. I'll leave it at 6 for now. External powers intervening, where you have Rome that takes both the north and the south. And you have that Rome and pagan Rome through Pompey, who takes the north and takes the south. Julius Caesar comes and takes the south. Pompey takes the north. Augustus comes and takes everything. So, as we go into these verses, the words of James White are appropriate. And we'll make that the 7th. That unfulfilled prophecy is difficult to pinpoint. Very difficult. And this is what James White says. He said this in 1877, and it's quoted in the Bible commentary. In exposition of unfulfilled prophecy, where history is not written, the student should put forth his propositions with not too much positiveness, lest he find himself straying in the field of fancy. Field of fancy, or the field of speculation. Right? There are those who think more of the future truth than the present truth. And they see but little light in the path in which they walk, but think they see great light ahead of them. Positions taken upon the Eastern question are based upon prophecies which have not yet met their fulfillment. So when we enter these verses, we're looking at the Eastern question, because you're going to see that in Daniel it says news from the East. And for us who live in the last days of the last time, it becomes really fascinating to read that. In verse 44 it says, "But tidings out of the east." Tidings out of the Middle East, tidings out of China, out of the east. Now, I have a copy here of the Bible commentary for verses 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, and 45. And they write the whole thing here in one page. You know why? Because they skip it. They have no comments. The Adventist Bible commentary on verse 41, no comments on verse 42, no comments on verse 43, no comments on verse 44. They've commented on every single verse up until this section, because this is the time of the end, and they're not sure. So there's no comment. When I read Dr. Price, who was a professor of theology of the Seventh-day Adventists, and I've quoted a lot from him, but I told you from verse 36 on I couldn't quote him anymore because he doesn't accept France as being the fulfillment of verses 36 through 39. And in these verses 40 to 45, it just gets worse. He says, it's all in the future. We really don't know. It's the papacy. It's now all going to be a spiritual battle, and I don't believe that. Because there weren't spiritual battles here before. These were literal battles. Even France, with its attack against God, was carrying out a physical revolution, killing people. Even the papacy, in their religious battles, in their spiritual fight against the sanctuary in heaven and against God, were carrying out literal crimes of killing the Valdenses and the Albigenses and the Huguenots. These were literal wars. So having said that, let's go to Daniel chapter 11 and read verse 40. "And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships, and he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over." The time of the end is 1798. It is the end of the 1260-year prophecy. And it is in 1798 that France is at the highlight of history. And I have photocopied from the World Encyclopedia History, the World History Encyclopedia, from 1798. From 1798 to the year 1801, we have France warring in Egypt. France in its Egyptian conquest and making war against the north, against the Ottoman Empire. It seems that France wants to repeat the history of Pompey and Julius Caesar. We understand that Napoleon is the main character here. And Napoleon addresses himself before the Directory, which is the governing body in France at this time. And they want him to go to England, to cross the channel and fight against the English and dethrone the English kings, because France is against all royalty at this time. But Napoleon convinces the Directory that let's hit a blow at England's Indian Empire. England has an Indian Empire, and he thought of going through Egypt. I mean, that was the land of the Pharaohs and of the Ptolemies, and Alexander was there. So he wanted to retrace those steps of glory. So Napoleon, we read here that on July 21st, really even before that date, July 1st, Napoleon lands in Egypt, July 1st. And it's the Battle of Alexandria. According to the World History Encyclopedia, it says Alexandria, July 1st to July 2nd is the battle. In what year? 1798. It fits in perfectly. All these movements at the time of the end. And Alexandria falls. And right after Alexandria, he heads on to the pyramids. The Battle of the Pyramids is on July 21st. So this is the Battle of the Pyramids. The banners of France are taken. And the scripture says, and at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him. Who is him? We believe it to be, from verse 39, to be France. So you have three powers. Write it down. This is the key to verse 40. The king of the south is Egypt. Him and he is France. That atheistic power who now has Napoleon at its head. And the king of the north is whoever has Syria. And for the last 400 years, while the papacy has been gaining power, the Ottoman Empire has governed Syria and Palestine. Islam represented through the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire is in Revelation chapter 9. Which I'm assuming you've already studied and covered the Ottoman Empire and the Turks as they went forth as one of the great woes.
I'm sorry, what does he refer to?
To France.
France, yes. Okay, thanks.
To Napoleon. Just like the he at one time referred to Pompey, and another time referred to Julius Caesar, and another time referred to Augustus Caesar, and another time referred to Constantine, and another time referred to Justinian. Now it's Napoleon. At the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him. Imagine, if you're pushing at someone, are you really resisting them? Are you really gaining strength over them? No. You're pushing at them. I remember as a kid, growing up in the Northeast, in New Jersey, during the racial tensions of the late 60s in the U.S., and you're going to start a fight, what you do is you push the guy. And then he pushes you. And you push, and then somebody, boom, would hit the other. And then you'd have a gang fight. Well, the king of the south was pushing at him, trying to get him off, trying to remove France. But he failed, really failed. Napoleon left France with 35,000 troops on May 3rd, 1798. He had a group of scientists. This was like Star Trek, you know, with a group of scientists trying to document and to do research. But this was a military expedition. Primarily, he brought 1,230 horses, 17 large ships, and 300 smaller transport ships. A total of 54,000 persons left May 3rd, 1798 from France, and they arrived on July 1st. July 2nd, Alexandria falls. And on July 21st, the pyramids, the Battle of the Pyramids are just outside of Cairo. The French defeat the Egyptian leaders. Okay, now that's not going to be all. We got to read the rest of the text. It says, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind. You know who the king of the north contracts? The greatest of all generals or admirals at sea. Lord Horatio Nelson. Lord Nelson. And if you go to England, you're going to see outside of the Museum of Art, the Gallery of Art, a huge pillar with Lord Nelson and his ships. And if you go to their major church in, not Westminster Abbey, but I forget the name of it right now, the church in London, their major basilica and cathedral there, you're going to see that in the basement, Lord Nelson is buried. He was the greatest of the admirals of England. And Lord Nelson came with all his fleet. He had been chasing the French, and he couldn't meet the French. Now, Napoleon was a force to be reckoned with at land. But at sea, Napoleon's army was not a navy. And Admiral Nelson had a remarkable navy. So you have the Battle of the Nile, August 1st. The British Admiral Horatio Nelson comes. This Battle of the Nile. And I tell you, there's going to be a number of battles where the North is going to come like a whirlwind. It says with chariots, with horsemen, with many ships. Those many ships are from England. You have to reckon with England as part of the King of the North. Because now England makes a treaty with the Turks. Russia enters the picture and makes a treaty with the Turks. Austria enters the picture and makes a treaty with the Turks. Portugal enters the picture. Now, Portugal is really not that important at this time because they've gone through the Lisbon earthquake and they cease to be a really powerful empire as they were at one time in the 1400s and 1500s, where they were opening colonies throughout Africa and Asia, all the way to Japan and China. But here you have England and Russia, the English, the most powerful of all, uniting with the Turks. So the Turks start coming down with chariots and horsemen by land, and the English with their ships. The Turks bring their ships also, and they fight against Napoleon. Now, Napoleon loses at the Battle of the Nile. This is what the world history says. The Battle of the Nile, the British Admiral Horatio Nelson, having sought the French in vain throughout the eastern Mediterranean, finally located the French fleet at the harbor of Aboukir, east of Alexandria. Without much difficulty, he managed to destroy the fleet, which, being crowded in the anchorage, was unable to maneuver. Thus, Nelson cut Napoleon and his force from off of France. So here he attacks the Delta, and the French fleet is totally wiped out. So now Napoleon stays on land, and he decides to go north into the countries. We read verse 41, please. And he shall enter also into the glorious land. Did Napoleon enter the glorious land? Yes, he did. He did enter Israel. And there was a big battle at Jaffa, the ancient Joppa. And Napoleon defeated the Syrians. The Syrians were under the rule of the Ottoman Empire. So this is the Battle of Jaffa. And Napoleon wins there. And he also conquers in Zeta and Japhet, all these provinces, many countries, really I wouldn't say many countries, that word countries is supplied. Really many provinces or many places shall be overthrown. Napoleon was able to do that. But these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom, Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. See, the idea of Napoleon was to take Egypt, then take all of Syria, and then take Persia and eventually get to India and overtake India and break the market of the English that are making tons of money with the spice trade. But he was not able to enter Edom. He wasn't able to enter Moab, and he wasn't able to enter Ammon. He was not. What happened? He reaches a town called Acre. And this Acre is north of Jerusalem. And it is there that he really runs into problems. On the 19th to the 20th of, from the 19th of March to the 20th of May of 1799, we're in 1799. The Battle of Jaffa was 1799. The Battle of the Nile was 1798. Napoleon loses here. Okay? So he goes to Jaffa, he wins. And then he goes on to Acre. This is the Battle of Acre, also of 1799, and they siege the city. The Ottoman Empire has come down with their chariots, with their horsemen, and they're in the city, and they have people in Samaria. The English have their ships on the Mediterranean, with the Turks also with their ships. So Napoleon thinks he is surrounding Acre. But in reality, he's being surrounded by this whirlwind, so to speak, that is coming about him. What is the result? Well, plague breaks out among the French. Have you heard the saying, when it rains, it pours? Napoleon just lost. Now he's about to take this city. He is the great general to be reckoned with. He can outwit bigger armies, but you can't outwit nature. There's a plague. The plague means these people are dying right and left. His army is really, they lose thousands of soldiers, and he doesn't have thousands of soldiers to spare. So he decides to retreat after 60 days, and he retreats to Egypt because of the plague. They say that the outbreak of the plague in the French army causes a hasty retreat to Egypt. Well, there's the battle of, we mentioned the Battle of the Nile. Well, there's another Battle of the Nile that takes here. This is the Battle of Abu Qir, which is the harbor there at the Nile. This time the British land at Abu Qir. And what happens? Napoleon wins, because it's not on sea, it's on land. So he defeats the British and the Turks at Abu Qir. And not only that, now the Egyptians join the French. They like the French. They like what the French have done now for the last year in Egypt. And they really don't like the Turks. So now the Egyptians help Napoleon, and they defeat the English, and they defeat the Turks. But Napoleon is getting impatient, and he leaves Egypt August 24th. So what do you think is going to happen with the French fleet there without Napoleon? And the British there, and the Turks there, and all these Muslims. Well, the remaining French are going to be overtaken. He leaves General Kleber in charge of the remaining French forces. He is assassinated by a Turk in June. And he is succeeded by Menot. And Menot is defeated at Alexandria, 1801. So, Alexandria, 1801. The French surrender. Menot surrenders on March 21st, 1801. They sign a treaty, and Egypt is restored to the Sultan, to the Ottoman Empire. Now, before that happens, there are a number of battles that take place. One of them being the Battle of Rosetta, where the French lose. And there's another battle, a third battle now of Aboukir, and the French lose after Napoleon is gone. And the Rosetta we want to highlight, because what's so important about Rosetta? Anybody know?
Rosetta Stone.
The Rosetta Stone. And what is the Rosetta Stone?
It's the archaeological finding.
Okay, what is this archaeological finding?
Evidence of the battle.
What?
Evidence of the battle.
Evidence of the battle? No.
Es,
Evidence of the Bible? No.
escrituras de los judíos, de
Not the writing of the Jews.
It translates Egyptian hieroglyphics.
That's right. You see, for centuries, the Egyptian hieroglyphics were not understood. They were not understood. And so this stone has three languages. It has the hieroglyphics of the Egyptians, which are characters. You know, you see this is the sun, all right? Or this is the sun, this is the water, this is the feather is the law. So you have now the hieroglyphics of the Egyptian that also has the Egyptian script. There was a script that was later invented, which was not understood. The hieroglyphics were not understood. But there was Greek. And the Greek was understood. So it took a couple of really bright young men who spent hours and months deciphering, and they found one word in the Egyptian hieroglyphics to meet with the Greek. And from that one word, they went on and on and on, and today we can understand the hieroglyphics. I have a book called The Book of the Dead, and it has interlinear. So you have the Book of the Dead written in hieroglyphics, and under it, you have the English translation of every single word. And it's really neat. If you read it long enough, you could start to understand some of the hieroglyphics of the Egyptians. So this was very significant, because now we could read the Egyptian texts. We could read the Egyptian sculptures. Their columns were all written on. That was the ancient custom. If you had a big column, you wrote on it in hieroglyphics. It's the whole history. It's a biased history, but it is history. It was written historically. I mean, it was written in the past. So this was the key for understanding. Now think for a moment of a great event in the history of the universe, that something is written in three languages, just like these three languages.
On the cross.
Very good. On the cross. On the cross, Jesus is hanging. It's written in Hebrew. It's written in Greek. And it's written in Latin. If you don't understand one of those three languages, that would not be the case in Israel. Because if you were Roman, you knew Latin. If you were Greek, you knew Greek. And if you were Hebrew, you understood Hebrew. And those were the people that were there in Palestine. It was written in those three languages. The Rosetta Stone is written in three languages also. And we have found, through archaeology, other ancient stones written in three languages. And the same thing occurred with the Chaldean. It was also written, if I'm not mistaken, one of the languages was Chaldean or Sumerian, and another was Greek. And so through the Greek was the entering wedge to the ancient languages. So that's why that Battle of Rosetta was very important. This British officer discovers this stone and then sends it back home. Now, verse 42. And he shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape it. I agree with Uriah Smith that in verse 42 you have a change. And if this verse was fulfilled, it has to be with the Ottoman Empire or with the Brits. Because Britain has an incredible influence over the Turks, and they stretched forth their hands also upon the countries. I want you to know that Britain dominated all those countries in the Middle East. Palestine was under the British control. They were the ones who gave Palestine back to the Jews. All those countries in the Middle East were under British influence or control. There was a man by the name of Josiah Litch, and a few months before 1840, August 11, he foretold that the British Empire would fall. Not the British Empire. He foretold that the Ottoman Empire would fall. It's either August 10 or August 11. It was in August of 1840. And he was a great preacher. He was part of the Millerite movement. And when he predicted that the Ottoman Empire would fall, it so happened that on that date they received a telegram from Britain and from the nations of Europe telling the Sultan what he could and what he could not do. So in all political sense, it fell. And here the Turks could not do anything without being at peace with the British. Now, read these two verses with me, 42 and 43, and you'll see it to be true. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. Okay, Britain has entered in through the Turks. They have taken Egypt, and Egypt was not able to fight against, to withstand the attack of the Turks and the British. And verse 43, and he shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, over all the precious things of Egypt. This is a reality. What did the British do? They took all these treasures and they sent them to the British Museum. What did the French do? The French did the same thing. They took the treasures of Egypt and took it and sent it to France. But of all countries, Britain more than any other, taking mummies, taking gold, taking silver. Go to their museums and you'll see them. He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver and over all the precious things of Egypt. And up till there, I believe prophecy has been fulfilled. Beyond there, I don't see it being fulfilled. It says, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at their steps. Britain did not invade Ethiopia, except during World War II, and Libya also World War II. If we want to go into World War II, that did happen, where the Italians, Mussolini, had come to Ethiopia and taken it, and the Germans had taken Libya, and the Britain and the United States enter the picture. And the Ethiopians fight, and they overthrow Mussolini. But I believe these verses are yet to have a greater fulfillment in the future. It says, but tidings out of the east, out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy utterly, to make away many. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, that he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. Dr. Adam Clark, in 1825, he said, regarding the tidings out of the east and the north shall trouble him, he said, this part of prophecy is allowed to be yet unfulfilled, and what is portended, the course of prophetic events will show. And that is the position also of James White. That is the position of Uriah Smith, that these verses are in the future. So let's look at a possible scenario. Okay, that's how I want to look at these remaining verses, as a possible scenario of what can come about. We go to verse 43. You know, we've seen the Arab Spring, that it influenced Egypt. From Egypt, it jumped to Libya. Nothing has happened in Ethiopia. It may, but nothing. Verse 44, the tidings out of the east. The east in the Bible has always been the Arabs. The Arabs have always been considered the east. And it is significant that history would end with that point of the east, because it was in the beginning, in the book of Genesis, that Cain went to the east of Eden. We read in Genesis chapter 4, verse 16. Richard, Genesis 4:16, and Cain went out from the presence of the Lord.
Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod, on the east of Eden.
So Cain goes there to the east. And it is significant that at the end of history, it will be the tidings of the east. Today, who dominates the east? It is Islam. And they're very military-minded. Look what the Quran says. I have a quote from the Quran here. I have the Quran. I have read the Quran. And I have cited the Quran. And I want to cite it here, if I can find my notes. In Surah 2, verse 187. So Surah, the Quran is divided by surahs. Surahs are like chapters. Surah. Surah 2, verse 187. This is what it says. Kill them wherever they are and cast them out where they have cast you out from. That's what it says. Verse 212. Surah 2, verse 212. You have been prescribed war. War. This is the jihad. You know? The jihad that they're always talking about is in their Quran. And the Quran was not written by Muhammad. It was written many decades after the death of Muhammad. It was written by the followers of Muhammad. Muhammad didn't know how to write or read. If I have a little time, I'll tell you the history, the biography of Muhammad, the great prophet of Islam and a great warrior of Islam. And so you have here where they're saying, kill them wherever you find them and cast them out wherever you have been cast out of. You know, remember that in the 6-day war, Israel cast out the Arabs from Israel, from Jerusalem. They conquered all the territory surrounding Israel. And the Arabs really hate that. They have that, how could I say, a thorn in the flesh that they want to get even. And their Quran says you have to get even with anyone who has cast you out of some place. You need to seek revenge. So let's read some other verses that show that the East refers to the Arabs. Let's go to the book of Joshua. Not Joshua, to Judges. Judges, please. Judges chapter 6. Danny, can you read that for us? Judges chapter 6. Judges 6, verses 3 through 5. So it was when Israel had sown.
And so it was when Israel had sown that the Midianites came up, and the Amalekites and the children of the east, even they came up against them. And they encamped against them, and destroyed the increase of the earth, till thou come unto Gaza, and left no sustenance for Israel, neither sheep, nor ox, nor ass. For they came up with their cattle and their tents, and they came up as grasshoppers for multitude. For both they and their camels were without number, and they entered into the land to destroy it.
Now, these are very important verses that I've just quoted from Judges. Number one, because it says they're the children of the east. Where is Midian? That is Saudi Arabia. It mentions here that they came to Israel, and they invaded and destroyed Israel. Number three, it says they came with tents. That's a key word, tents. Because in verse 45, that word tents is highlighted again. This is a very Arab custom of living in tents. Even the king of Saudi Arabia spends sometimes living in tents. So did Gaddafi in Libya, living in tents. And it says, and he came as grasshoppers, Now come with me to Revelation chapter 9, verse 3. You're going to see the same verse as grasshoppers. And there came out of the smoke, Emelina please, Revelation chapter 9, verse 3. And there came out of the smoke. What does it say?
And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power as the scorpions of the earth have power.
Okay, locusts and grasshoppers are the same word. They're the same. So there came out of the smoke these grasshoppers, and unto them was given power as scorpions. Scorpion is an animal from the desert. And that's where the Arabs come, from the desert. That's where Islam was born, was in the desert. It was born in Mecca, where Muhammad was born. And he died in Medina. And those are the two holy cities of Islam. Mecca and Medina. So, we read that also in Revelation chapter 16, verse 12. Revelation 16, verse 12. It says, the east, and the sixth angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up, that the kings of the east might be prepared. You see that to be part of the plagues. So, it may just be that this verse 45 will not have fulfillment till the war of Armageddon, the last war, where the east will come in. Tidings out of the east, that the Euphrates will become dry. What does that mean, will become dry? A lot of water means a lot of people. Drying means a killing of a lot of people. Who knows? Maybe they'll drop an atomic bomb upon Iraq, or upon Iran, or upon Syria, or Turkey, somewhere in the east, to destroy millions of people, thousands of people. World War II saw the death of more than 20 million people. Armageddon will be worse. Do you need more verses to show these kings of the east that refer to the Arab, to that? Write down the verses. You can look them up later. Genesis 25, verses 2, 3, and 6. 25, 2, 3, and 6. And Genesis 29, 1. Yes. We go back to Daniel. Daniel chapter 11. Daniel chapter 11. We're in verse 44. Tidings out of the east, out of the north shall trouble him. Okay, so now there's going to be tidings out of the north. Now, it is my personal understanding that America may become the third phase of Rome, and that it will take over Syria to become the new king of the north. Whoever has Syria is the king of the north. Turkey became the king of the north. Britain, for a while, seemed to be the king of the north, as they were influencing through Turkey and having dominance in that area of Jordan and Israel. Well, the nation of Jordan was established by Britain. And the scripture says, but tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Who is that him? That is the question. Who is the him here? Because we're jumping in time. I believe there's a gap, a big jump in verse 43, especially as we go to 44, with over 100 years or more of time. But the north is whoever dominates Syria. That's the king of the north. That is the principle throughout the book of Daniel chapter 11. America started with Kuwait. It continued with Iraq. The Euphrates ends in Kuwait, runs through Iraq, then runs through Syria, and then through Turkey. So we will see. If America invades Syria, then you know America has become the new king of the north. And we know that will be the end of time. We're getting very close to the end of time. And therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make away many. So he goes forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make away many. To me, this fits right in with the spirit of Islam. A nation that, or people that attack with fury, with destruction, that want to destroy many. In verse 45 it says, and he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas. The Spanish says the tents. The Arabs are the ones that live in tents of his palace between the seas. What seas? This is the Holy Land. Well, you have the Mediterranean, you have the Dead Sea, you have the Red Sea, you have the Sea of Galilee. So Israel is among the seas. Verse 45 is yet to be fulfilled. It has to do with some power taking Israel. Israel today is not under the influence of Turkey nor of Syria. They are an independent nation with a great alliance with the United States. So in the glorious holy mountain, what is the glorious holy mountain? The glorious holy mountain is Jerusalem. This is the great city, the glorious holy mountain. Daniel chapter 9 verse 16 already mentioned this. 9:16, where it says, O Lord, according to all thy righteousness, I beseech thee, let thine anger and the fury be turned away from the city of Jerusalem, thy holy mountain. Did you read it there? Thy holy mountain, Jerusalem. So Daniel chapter 9 verse 16 tells us that the holy mountain is Jerusalem. There is no other holy mountain on earth but Jerusalem, Mount Moriah. We believe the holiest of all mountains is in heaven. It's the original Mount Zion in heaven. So that holy mountain, Daniel 9:16 tells us, is Jerusalem, Mount Moriah. Joel chapter 3 verse 17. Joel 3:17. Joel 3:17. So shall you know that I am the Lord your God, dwelling in Zion, my holy mountain. Then shall Jerusalem be holy, and there shall no strangers pass through her anymore. Can you understand that phrase now in Joel? Strangers will not pass through it. We've read the entire book of Daniel chapter 11 of strangers and Gentiles going through Palestine. The Syrians and the Egyptians and the Romans and the Turks and the British, all these Gentiles running through the nation of Israel. And there is a prophecy that they will no longer, strangers shall pass through her anymore. My holy mountain. And the end of history ends with some external power taking Israel. Israel losing at war against its surrounding nations. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, which is Jerusalem. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. When the day comes, we will know. And none shall help him, shall come to his end. Do you know what that end means? The end of grace. The end. And at that time shall Michael stand up. We'll leave that for the next lecture. But we go to, please, to Revelation chapter 10, verse 7. Revelation 10, 7. The end. This is the end. All eyes will be focused in the land of Israel. There is a sign 70 kilometers north of Israel called the Valley of Megiddo. And there's a sign that says, this is where the last world war is going to be fought, according to Revelation chapter 16. It's there. I have a picture of it. Brother Gudnik was there, and he took a picture. I have a copy of that picture. Where the last world war is going to be fought. People know it. And some people want to make it a spiritual battle. Okay, God will intervene in that battle, but it will be a literal battle, just like all the battles in Daniel chapter 11. A political, religious battle. Revelation chapter 10, verse 7 is one of the most fascinating verses in Revelation. It says, but in the days of the voice of the seventh angel. Which angel is this? What angel?
Seven.
What seventh what? There's so many seven angels in the scripture. No? Well, that's interesting, but it's not the seventh plague, because then grace would remain open during the seven plagues. You said it? Seventh trumpet. The seventh trumpet. So, but at the days of the voice of the seventh angel, that's the seventh trumpet, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God should be finished, that he has declared to his servants, the prophets. That's what God's waiting for. The angels are holding the winds of war from Europe, from America, from Russia, from China, from Islam, and their holy jihad. If you read the Quran, it says that Jesus will come in the last final war to help Muhammad. Jesus is going to come. They say it in the Quran. They do not deny the second coming of Christ. It's in there. And the Jews are waiting for Messiah to come and save them. And Christians are waiting for Jesus to return. But it will be too late. It says, the mystery of God should be finished. The mystery of God will be finished when the door is closed. When the door of grace is closed. And we are waiting for that day. And we need the mystery of God to be finished in our hearts, in our minds. Now, what is the mystery of God? The mystery of God is in the book of Timothy. It says that God was manifested in flesh. A.T. Jones says, it is not enough that Jesus was manifested in the womb of Mary 2,000 years ago. No, he must be manifested in your flesh and my flesh. Jesus must be recreated in us. We must have the mind of Christ. We must have the heart of Christ. I want to leave you with this thought about adoption. My mom gave me a whole bunch of little stories, and I read this one. I found it very cute. There was a little girl talking with another little girl about adoption. And one of them says, well, what is adoption? I don't know. And then the little girl says, so it's very simple. You see, when you're not adopted, you grow in the womb of your mom. In the tummy of your mom. But when you're adopted, you grow in the heart of your mom. And we are adopted. We're adopted to be the children of God. We grow in the heart of God. And God needs to grow in our heart. As we've looked at all these prophecies and seen the fantastic fulfillment of the chronology of the events, we cannot doubt that the verses that remain to be fulfilled will be fulfilled. And although we see it as with mist and not knowing every single detail, we know it will be fulfilled, and soon. And we want to be ready. And we need the present truth to be in our hearts and in our minds, that we may triumph through God's Spirit. This is my wish and prayer in His name. Amen.
Amen. Amen.